Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The New Norm with Selena Hill on Black Enterprise. Today, I have the privilege to speak with Carlos Watson, who is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a former CNN and MSNBC anchor, an Ivy League graduate, and the co-founder and CEO of OZY Media, which is a fresh, cutting-edge source for news, culture, and ideas. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Carlos.
Selena, good to be here with you and nice to see you.
Absolutely. So, Carlos, in just 5 years, you built OZY into this huge brand and business that has a presence on TV. You have in person festivals, podcasts, and an impressive fan base of 50 million plus people. So, in a nutshell, how did you do all of that? Like, how did that happen?
Do you know what it has been a dream realized. You know, they talk about dreams deferred sometimes, but it's definitely been a dream realized, and I've loved it. I've had good partners, Samir Rao, my co-founder, and lots of other people I work with. Even right now, as you and I are talking, I'm looking at Marco and other people who I work with, and so we put together a really good team. And I think, you know, Selena, when we started, OZY started as a colorful set of newsletters. We had a newsletter in the morning, newsletter in the afternoon, and you called it the new normal. We wanted to bring people the new normal. We called it the new and the next. We wanted to tell them about up and coming rising stars, new trends, big ideas a year or two before they would normally find out about it in the mainstream press. And that ended up going so well that it was kind of natural to turn some of that into TV shows. You know, take our best articles and make them the basis of our TV shows, like The Contenders, like Breaking Big, like Defining Moments, or make them the basis of our podcasts, like The Thread and Flashback. And eventually, you know, we had to take it to the park. So we had to build a festival, OZY Fest, which hopefully you'll get a chance to visit one day.
Yeah, and as I told you, Carlos, I told you this offline. I'm a huge fan of OZY Media. I've been a subscriber to the newsletters for I think a year or two now. I've been watching as many interviews as I could that you do on your show from start to finish. They're so good. And then I read that, I know you guys are in your third season of the Carlos Watson show. And I read that it was actually the fastest growing talk show in YouTube history with over 100 million viewers. Um, does something like that surprise you or impress you? Because it's super impressive.
Well, you know what? I love it, and it does surprise me in a good way because it was only a year ago that we got started here. And in fact, the whole team, you can't see the whole team here, but we were talking a couple weeks ago about the fact that, you know, we started right when COVID was at its, worst. It was kind of thick and crazy. Who knew whether or not you could get people to agree to do these remote interviews and whether or not they were going to be any good and whether or not, even if they were good, anybody was going to watch. And so it's been a blessing. Selena, I'm so appreciative. When we first started out, we thought we'd probably do 20 episodes, is kind of how we thought about it originally. And then one thing led to the next. And we started some of the first guests we had, like we had Karen Bass, the congresswoman from LA, who was being considered for vice president. At the time, we had Terry Crews, the actor who was getting into it. We had Sean Spicer, I like to call him Spicy P, who was President Trump's press secretary. And so we started off with a bang. We started off with really interesting people, a really rich mix, and it kept getting better. And I think as a team, we were good together. I think we were good together. There was good mojo, and I'm proud of what we built.
Every time I hear Sean Spicer, I just think of SNL because he gave them so much fodder. I mean, the skits were just so phenomenal. I'm so happy that you mentioned, Carlos, some of the people you interviewed. Add to the list, Swiss Beats, Will I Am, Her, Sweetie. What is it that you personally gained from your interviews? And I ask that because, I watch them. So I see how curious you are, how open the conversation is, how authentic it is. What is it that you gain? And what have you learned through all of these conversations with huge change makers?
It really varies. Like when I was with the City Girls the other day, just seeing them together and how good they are to each other even though they've got very different personalities, and seeing how they've helped each other stay strong when sometimes things weren't quite going the way they may have wanted it to. And I've kind of loved seeing some of that. Also getting those two beautiful ladies to smile. It took a little bit of effort, but we ended up having a really good time. I've learned things from people like Swiss Beats and Timbaland about starting verses and seeing verses grow, and like being in that moment and being humble, and hearing Swiss Beats talk about what it was like to hear us be on 125th Street, where I'm talking about, in Harlem, and hearing, cars go by, bumping his song, and hearing that, and kind of feeling that and seeing that. I've learned so much from different people, even a wonderful woman named Ida Rodriguez, who's a wonderful comedian and is going to be one of comedy's next big stars. And just kind of hearing her not just be funny, but hearing her be thoughtful, and hearing her talk about, treating each other with empathy. And even when you feel maybe you're most frustrated with someone, maybe taking a step back and trying to understand maybe where that person is. And that's not always an easy thing to do, but someone said to me, Selena, it's almost like getting a TED Talk, getting to take a master class every day. And I do feel like that. I feel like whether we've been listening to someone like Wynton Marsalis, the jazz great, or someone like Adina Friedman, who's the CEO of NASDAQ, I feel like it's always been a chance to look into someone else's world and maybe learn a little bit. And so I've enjoyed that a lot.
I've read that you've also created and sold one of the nation's largest college prep companies. And on top of that, you've even worked as the global head of education investment banking for Goldman Sachs. So when we see you presented as a media entrepreneur, that's just one of many of the hats that you wear or have worn. I wanted to know, how and when did you make this leap into becoming a media entrepreneur?
It's funny. I give a lot of credit, a lot of appreciation to my dad. I grew up in Miami, and my dad grew up in the countryside, and he used to listen to the radio a lot. And he said that when he would hear the radio talk about the news, that it didn't just inform him, but it would inspire him. Selena, that he heard about people who weren't farmers. He heard about people going to college. He heard about people moving to different countries and different places. And it gave him a sense of his possibilities. It made him feel like a broader person. And so he always loved the news hard. You know what I mean? He loved it in a special way because it had given more to him than just that day's headlines. It gave to him his tomorrow and his future. And so as a kid, we would go to the Miami airport, and he would tell me, run inside, buy him newspapers from around the world. And when someone's eyes light up, whether you're bringing them good food, or you're bringing them, to their favorite basketball game, or you're bringing them to meet someone they like, that's how his eyes would light up when you would bring him those newspapers. So I grew up loving media. And so the idea of one day, I don't know that I would have told you at 5, 6, 7, 8, growing up in Miami, that I was going to be a media entrepreneur, but I think that the love of it started early. And I think later on, as I grew up, spending that first part of my career in business, working at bigger companies like McKinsey and Goldman, and later getting to start my first startup with my little sister and a good friend, I think I felt like I got to learn a lot about business, and then getting the chance to go into media, initially as a pundit, and then starting to get to host and anchor things. I think all of those things came together, and add on to that a little bit of encouragement from my mom, which is how this thing finally jumped off. That it's been a wonderful journey filled with good partners. That doesn't mean it's been easy the whole time, but I think I got lucky in that I had some of this business experience, and I had some of this media experience, and the chance to put them together on the same plate ended up being a good thing.
Yeah, I know your business experience came into handy, especially when it came to raising capital. You talk about your partners. I read that you raised $70 million from investors to pour into OZY Media. How did you go about securing funding, especially when I feel like we're in a time where we're oversaturated with content, yet and still you created OZY and it burst into the scene? Was it hard to get people to sign on and invest?
I think it always is. And so it's a blessing whenever anybody trusts you with anything, whether they trust you with their time or their faith or their confidence or especially their love. Sometimes they may trust you with their name. My dad always reminds me, he says, my name isn't my name. He tells me I'm just a renter. And I'm Carlos Watson Jr., that he owns the name and then I'm just renting it. And so I've got to be careful with it. But whenever anybody trusts you with anything, including their investment and their money, I've been really grateful with it. I think it helped early on that we had several people who kind of raised their hand right off the bat. A guy named Michael Moe believed in us really strongly. A wonderfully smart and terrific person named Lorene Powell Jobs also trusted us early on, and a number of folks like that backed us. I think the other thing that probably helped a little bit, Selena, is my dad always used to say, and still says, that the first rule of leadership is never ask anyone to do anything you wouldn't do yourself. So he says, if you won't work hard, don't ask anybody else to work hard. If you won't be organized, don't ask anybody else to be organized. If you won't pick up trash, don't ask anybody else to pick up trash. And that also started with fundraising, that we early on, my partner Samir and I, we put our own money in to OZY as well, which you don't always hear about, but we felt like we couldn't easily ask other people to put money in if we didn't have enough confidence, enough hope, enough aspiration to put our own money on the line. And so I think that helped a little bit, if I'm honest. I think that when people saw that, which not many people do, I think it made people say, these guys are serious, they're putting their money where the mouth is.
Often here at Black Enterprise, we report and hear from so many Black founders who have found such trouble and challenges when it comes to securing capital, when it comes to securing funding and getting investors. What advice would you share to those entrepreneurs when it comes to, getting the investments that they need in order to launch a big idea?
It's funny. So many thoughts went through my head when you said that, because I feel that very personally. Even though I've been fortunate to raise the money I've raised, it hasn't been easy. I do think, while I've been super blessed in this world, and I realize that, I do feel like I've experienced real differences based on race, and I think I would have had a different path to raising maybe more capital, maybe 5 to 10 times as much, and maybe sooner and easier. And again, that's not me saying that I don't appreciate what has happened, but as someone who has watched literally thousands of fundraising processes, I think I have a good sense of how things can play out. And if you got a certain level of accomplishment in your business, you normally would see that you can raise this much money at this kind of valuation, and it takes this long. And so it's one of the things, Selena, I actually want to talk more about beginning next year, because I think it's a real challenge for a lot of founders. And I think a lot of good people who invest money, they think there may be a little bit of a difference for a Black entrepreneur versus a non-Black entrepreneur. But I literally think it's a 10x difference, like a 20x difference. Whereas I think most people think maybe it's a 10% difference, a 20% difference. And I think there's some changes that as a society we can smartly make that would allow more creative people to be able to raise capital and pursue interesting ideas. And I want to try and be a part of that, because I think good things would come of it. But some of the advice I'd have, if I was going to try and whittle it down to a handful of things, number one, I would say make sure that you've got a well thought out plan that's written out, and that the plan is for you as much as it is for an investor. And no plan is perfect. In fact, I say the very best plan is at most 30% correct, meaning it's mainly wrong, because it can't account for a pandemic, it can't account for stock market drop or the rise of Bitcoin or all that. And so don't make yourself feel like it's got to be a perfect plan, but make it a plan that you really believe in, right? So I think that's number one. Number two, make a commitment to put some of your money in. Some of your money may mean $1, may mean $5, may mean $500, may mean $5,000, but put your money on the line. Be able to say to other folks, I believe in this, not only intellectually, but I'm putting myself on the line. And I think you will be surprised, even if it's not the biggest number in the world, you'll be surprised at what that does to other people on the other side. It'll be like, look, Selena's in, Marco's in, Liz is in, Miles is in. They'll think differently about that. I think the third thing is, I always say, and this isn't just about fundraising, Selena, it's about other things, surround yourself with angels. I always say that there's a difference between mentors and angels. I say mentors help you when you know to ask them. Angels help you when you're not even smart enough to realize you need help. and what kind of help you need. And sometimes those mentors are not what you expect. They might be younger than you. They might have different political beliefs than you. They might come from different industries than yours. They might have a different level of education than you might expect your angel to have. But I tell people, stay humble, stay open. You don't know who your angel is going to be. I have several wonderful angels. One is a wonderful woman named Chris Boskin. Another's a guy named John Rogers. When people see Chris and me together, they might not immediately place us together. We're separated by a couple years in age. I won't say who's older, who's younger, but we're separated by a couple years in age. But Chris has always brought so much love to me and so much help, and she's never hesitated to pull out her relationships and make introductions. And she's Team Carlos all the time, and I am so grateful for that, because realistically, there's nothing I could have done in this life that could have justified her being Team Carlos in the way she is. And so all I can do is try and pay it forward by doing that for other people and say, this is a Chris Boskin bonus that you're getting. And so I've been really lucky. And then there's another guy named John Rogers. John works at Goldman. And again, people laugh when they see us together because, John and I are probably separated by about a foot in height. John's always got a three-piece suit on. I'm not exactly a three-piece suit kind of guy normally. I tend to be more progressive in my politics. John tends to be a little more conservative in politics, but John and I just like each other. And, people laugh when they see us on the Excella train sometimes. Sometimes we'll take the train together from D.C. to New York, because John and I always sit real close together because we're in conversation and we just like each other. And I would say that having people like John and having people like Chris vouch on your behalf when you're raising money, I think can also give someone else who's trying to make a decision. Can I trust Selena? Can I trust Christina? Can I trust Eric? Can I trust Brett? Whether or not that they can trust that person. And so those would be a couple things I would say. Having a great plan, putting a little bit of skin in the game yourself, and then finding not just a mentor, but finding an angel, finding someone who will vouch for you in really positive ways, make positive introductions. Those would be three of the things that I would encourage people to think about when it comes to fundraising.
Such great advice. Thank you for sharing that with us, Carlos. And, I want to dig into your backstory. You have such a fascinating backstory. I read that I believe you were 5 or 6 when you were expelled, kicked out of kindergarten. I read that you struggled during your fundamental years and that no one would have believed that the 10-year-old Carlos Watson would someday be a Harvard graduate and a graduate from Stanford Law School, which is amazing. So how do you go from getting kicked out of kindergarten to Harvard and Stanford?
Well, an important part of that story is my mom was the one who said that. May she rest in peace. Rose Camille Thomas Watson. She used to say, no one who saw your first 10 years would have believed your last 10 years except for a mother. And so, I always told her I got a good deal. My mom was smart and curious. She was a small town girl from small town Virginia, but she was just big-minded, and she fundamentally was a generous person. She didn't believe that it was zero sum. She didn't think that only she could do well. She thought there was enough room for everybody to do well. And so she walked in the world with that positivity. She walked into a coffee shop with that positivity. As a teacher, she walked into rooms with that positivity. In our living room, she had that positivity. And I think that even through the ups and downs, me being lucky enough to have someone like that who not only had that skill, but had the will to see me through and to see others through, I think probably as much as anything, I think ended up making a difference. And that's not to take anything away from my dad, who was great as well. But my mom, I used to tell her she was the heavyweight champion of moms. So ounce per ounce, she was the best mom I'd met. She was a Muhammad Ali of moms. She was great in that. And so I think that really ended up making a big difference for me. But you say I got expelled from school. I like to say I was asked to consider other alternatives. That's how I phrase it. I was asked to consider other alternatives. I think a couple things were going on. One was, growing up, I was very close to my older sister. We were very close. I was Scottie Pippen to her Michael Jordan. I was, Robin to her Batman, and we did a lot of things together. And when she wanted to go off to kindergarten, when she had to go off to kindergarten, she really, like any good leader, she wanted to bring, her troops with her.
Mm.
And they wouldn't let her bring me to school. And so about 2 weeks into it, she finally decided, well, if I can't bring him to school, I'm going to bring school to him. And you cannot have a better teacher than, your older sister who loves you, who wants you to do well, who wants you to keep up with her. And so, over the next 2 years, I learned how to read, I learned my numbers, I learned how to count. And so by the time I got to kindergarten, when they would say things that made sense, like 2 + 2, I thought they were joking because I had done that kind of work a half a lifetime ago. And so I would reply with jokes and I would say, what's 2 + 2? I'd say yellow. They didn't think that was funny. And, in those days, once you started to get in trouble, and particularly if you were a black boy, once you
Mm-hmm.
started getting in trouble, it was very easy for you to end up kind of siloed down the wrong track.
Mm.
And so I think I ended up down the wrong track. And I think now about the things that my parents ended up having to do. I mean, I remember we would hear this radio show come on in the car, which meant that we were getting close to school. And even at 5 years old, my stomach was in knots. I would feel horrible. I was like, I can feel that I'm about to be kicked out. And for me in those days, I can't even believe they did this, but in those days when they would kick me out of school, they would send 5-year-old me to literally stand on the side of the road next to the flagpole with nobody around. And I now think about all the things that could happen to a kid, right? But that probably happened to me 40 or 50 times, at that age. So you know, I definitely did not start out with a great early school experience, and it remained a little bit uneven or a lot uneven, I would say, through elementary school until I got into junior high. But again, I really got a good deal in terms of my mom, who had no quit in her, and
Mm.
again, who had a very broad, creative uh, possibility growth mindset, and my dad as well. And thankfully, they kept looking for new alternatives, which included new schools. And we had a couple of angels get involved. There was a nice woman named Carol Bernstein, who was a doctoral student at the University of Miami Salina, and she was sitting in the teachers' lounge and overheard the teachers talking about. She said that they didn't say my name. They just said this bad boy, Carlos Watson. They said it all as a whole thing. And she was doing her dissertation on disruptive students. And she was like, I found my perfect specimen. And she met me and she realized, I don't think this kid's a bad kid. I think he's bored. And
Mm.
she really began, she was the first advocate that my parents had in the school system, who weren't saying, let's kick him out, weren't saying we think he has mental challenges. In those days, they had a particular word for that, who weren't saying, we just want to beat it out of him. One teacher asked my dad, can I beat it out of him? And my dad, who also has a great sense of humor, you would enjoy him, said, sure, if you invite me to watch. and so, uh, so that's a little bit of a long answer, but I would say, Selena, that I was lucky enough to have family champions, which I know lots of people have. Sometimes it's a grandmother, sometimes it's an aunt,
Yes.
sometimes it's a big brother, sometimes it's a coach, sometimes it's someone else. And I ended up having internal allies in the schools, starting with Mrs. Bernstein, but later Mrs. Trencher and Mrs. Molvig and Mr. Stokes, and later Professor Kilson, lots of other really good teachers who believed in me.
Wow. What a fascinating story. I wanted to ask you, how do you think that those incidents and, being expelled, I read that they said that you had a learning disability. How did that affect the trajectory of your life? Did that become like a source of motivation?
Well, probably in two ways. One is, I probably have always identified with whatever. I mean, I always was going to have to, as a black boy and later a black man growing up, in these times. But I always was going to identify with the outsider or someone who, for whatever combination of reasons, might not fit convention. Whether that means someone's older, whether that means that they're shorter, whether that means that they've got a speech impediment, whether that means something else. That was, even when I love sports, I love following athletes. I always loved the scrappy athlete who wasn't the first choice. That always was kind of, so I think, that probably shaped my mindset a little bit. And then I do think the fact that some of those things happened, and then I was in a very bad accident, Selena, when I was 10, and they thought I was never going to walk again. And in fact, I couldn't walk for 3 years. And so just the fact that I walk today, it doesn't seem a big deal to most people, but every day I get up and I walk, even this morning, to me, is kind of a little bit of a mini victory, which I know probably would sound ridiculous to most people. But if you went 3 years in all of junior high school without walking and you didn't think you were ever going to walk again, it's a good deal. So I think all of those probably made me more willing to believe in that new approaches could work, to take chances on myself and others, to maybe be, I guess, what they call gritty now. My grandmother used to say, when hard things get hard, hard people get harder. And so, I always remember stories from her and others in that. And I certainly needed those in those times in which school wasn't quite working out the way I wanted it to. So probably in those ways, those have stayed with me, and maybe even in other ways that I don't know and fully appreciate.
Wow. And I'm so happy that you revert and give so much credit to your family and the other advocates in your life, because none of us make it to where we are without someone, right? And I'm so happy you're so cognizant of them and thankful for them. As we begin to wrap this conversation, another thing about you, Carlos, is you show a strong optimism. Obviously, we just heard your backstory and we see the hope, and even in your interviews, what is it that you're most optimistic about now that we're here in this new norm?
Yeah, I'm excited about the new norm, Selena, and I'm excited about you. I was excited to meet you, and I appreciate all of your smarts and your energy, and I can tell that you have that can't stop, won't stop in you, and I appreciate all of that. And I feel like there's so many good people like that I'm meeting who have that in whatever version works for them. I appreciate all of that kind of energy there. And I tell a lot of people that I think the 2020s are going to be the new 60s. That I think that we are going to be reimagining the way we live. One of the women I work with, Liz, her daughter is about to be a freshman, and I just think about all the different ways her daughter, education is going to be different for her, work is going to be different, even currency is going to be different, Bitcoin and all the rest, so many things. And I think that's a good thing. I love that we are going to be innovative and reimagine things. And I think the 60s was a time of, while it was a time of tumult, it also was a time of being more inclusive, and challenging some more fundamental questions about love and fairness and other things. So I'm really excited about that. And my optimism, Dr. King used to love that German philosopher who used to say the moral arc of the universe is long but bends towards justice. And, I think Mr. Mandela used to say, we got to get about bending it. You know what I mean? We got to do the work of bending it. And so I see so many talented people, yourself included, and it makes me hopeful that will happen. And I would say, what's been interesting, Selena, I've been having lots of conversations with already successful companies, and I've found them willing to engage what seems to me genuinely and authentically and thinking about that change too. And I think that that's a good sign as well. I think that that's a healthy sign. And that doesn't mean that everybody's perfect. That doesn't mean that everything is easy, but the kinds of conversations that I see Airbnb having, and their CEO, who I really liked, Brian Chesky. I met Tony Xu from DoorDash, and I'm glad that there are more leaders like him in the world. I've gotten to know some of the folks at Walmart who are doing really interesting and important things, and and refreshing how they move in the world, which I think is important. Some of the car companies talking about electric cars and talking about not just sustainability, but regeneration. Got friends at Ford, friends at GM, both thinking about kind of different futures and taking advantage of this moment, not to be scared, but to be bold, including kind of working with different partners. So I'm hopeful in that, and I've seen it over the last year. I feel like more people are being alive and active and not just giving lip service, but really trying to get into it in a really positive way.
Yes. Now, before we end, I would be remiss if I did not mention OZY Fest coming up in Miami. I think you mentioned it briefly, but if you can let folks know what they can look forward to and how they can get access to the festival.
Well, OZY Fest, aka More Fun Than Is Legal, is happening in Miami, October 16th and 17th on the water. It's going to be crazy. Musical performances by people like Lizzo and DaBaby, comedy with people like Kevin Hart and Issa Rae, chefs like Marcus Samuelsson and Padma Lakshmi, all kinds of amazing thinkers like Malcolm Gladwell and Amanda Gorman. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a beautiful gathering. And, you know, we call it a music and ideas festival. Some people, Selena, describe it as TED meets Coachella. Tickets are going to go on sale in just a short time, August 2nd. So people better get in early. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And, you know, as the man said, bienvenido a Miami. You know, come on down. It's my hometown. And hopefully we'll see a few Miami natives down there like City Girls and a few other good folks. So hopefully they'll come and play. A-Rod will come through. Pitbull may come through. So a lot of good people hopefully will be there.
Oh, yeah, it is definitely going to be a good time. Thank you so much for your time today, Carlos, and everything that you're doing in the innovation, tech, media, and business space.
Yeah. Selena, thank you. Thank you for having me. You know, I appreciate it.